A family of 6 poses in front of their newly built plankboard house in Beaufort, South Carolina, in the spring of 1868. The father stands at the far left, his hand resting on the shoulder of a boy no older than 10, both of them looking directly into the lens with an expression that is difficult to name, not quite pride, not quite defiance, and entirely earned. Street scene along Canal Street in New Orleans, Louisiana, around 1872. A black man in a well-cut coat walks past 2 white merchants, standing in a doorway, neither acknowledging the other. 3 years into Reconstruction, New Orleans was among the most politically integrated cities in the South, a condition that would last fewer than 10 more years. Reverend Isaiah Howell of the First African Baptist Church of Savannah, Georgia, photographed in his study in 1870. He holds a leather-bound Bible in his left hand and looks slightly past the camera as if the photographer arrived mid-thought. Howell had been preaching in secret before emancipation. By 1870, his congregation numbered over 400, a turpentine crew at work in the longleaf pine forests of Colquitt County, Georgia, around 1874. The men are arranged in a loose line along a row of scored trunks, their collection boxes and scrapers visible at their feet. Lord the one and moored trunks. 4 men sit on the steps of the Freedmen's Bureau office in Meridian, Mississippi, in the summer of 1866. One holds a folded document against his knee. The Bureau, established just 1 year earlier, processed land claims, labor disputes, and marriage registrations for formerly enslaved people across the South, a bureaucracy assembled from almost nothing in the immediate aftermath of war. Pupils and teachers at the Avery Normal Institute in Charleston, South Carolina, photographed in October 1869. The students sit in rows of uneven wooden chairs, their posture careful, their attention fixed forward. Established in 1865 by the American Missionary Association, Avery was among the first institutions in the state to provide formal education to freed black children, and many of the older students seated in this photograph had never held a book before the age of 20. A woman identified only as Celia poses in a photographer's studio in Mobile, Alabama, in 1871. She wears a white collar and holds her hands loosely in her lap. Nothing else is known about her. Seen at the levee in Vicksburg, Mississippi, in 1871. Dock workers unload cotton bales from a river steamer, while a white merchant in a tall hat watches from the landing above. It is easy to imagine the heat, the smell of the river, the sound of bale hooks against wood, a city returning, on the surface at least, to the rhythms of before. A wedding portrait taken in Columbia, South Carolina, in December 1867. The bride is seated, her dress filling the lower third of the frame, while the groom stands just behind her with one hand resting lightly on the back of her chair. For the formerly enslaved, the legal right to marry was barely 2 years old. Workers at a rice plantation outside Beaufort, South Carolina, photographed in 1869. The field hands move through the frame with their tools held upright, the plantation house visible in the far background, shutters drawn. A group of men assembled outside the Mississippi State Capitol in Jackson in January 1870. Among them stand 2 black legislators, both newly elected, at the center of the frame in dark suits. Mississippi had been readmitted to the Union 8 days earlier after ratifying the 14th and 15th Amendments. It would be nearly a century before the state legislature looked anything like this again. Robert Brown Elliott, representative from South Carolina's 3rd Congressional District, photographed in Washington, D.C. in 1871. Born in Boston and educated at Eton College in England, Elliott had been admitted to the South Carolina bar before the age of 25. In January 1874, he delivered what many considered the most celebrated speech in the history of the House of Representatives, a defense of the Civil Rights Act that drew a sustained ovation from the gallery and reportedly left his opponents without a reply. Children play in the unpaved alley between 2 wooden row houses in Memphis, Tennessee, around 1875. One boy has turned toward the camera, the others are still moving, their outlines soft in the long exposure. An ordinary afternoon, preserved. A freedmen's school in Greensboro, Alabama, around 1868. The building is a converted barn, and the children, roughly 30 of them, ranging from perhaps 5 years old to well into their teens, sit in uneven rows, facing a young woman who stands at a blackboard with chalk in her hand. Several of the oldest students appear to be in their 30s, learning to read for the first time. An elderly man identified in a handwritten note on the reverse as Uncle Ben, age approx 78, poses outside a small wooden cabin in Low Country, South Carolina, around 1870. He sits very straight in a cane chair, his bare feet flat on the ground, his eyes fixed somewhere to the left of the camera. Born into slavery around 1792, he had outlived the institution that defined every decade of his life. Two men, both members of the Metropolitan Police of New Orleans, pose with their badges displayed in 1868. One is black, one is white. Established under Reconstruction Governor Henry Clay Walmoth, the Metropolitan Police was among the first racially integrated law enforcement agencies in American history. The department was disbanded in 1877. A group portrait taken outside the Quinn Chapel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Louisville, Kentucky, in May 1873. The congregation lines the front steps 3 rows deep, dressed for Sunday. The church had been founded by enslaved people in 1838, decades before anyone in this photograph was free to pose in front of it. Scene captured on the main commercial block of Natchez, Mississippi, around 1873. Two black men in work clothes carry a rolled canvas through the street, while a cluster of white men confer in front of the Exchange Hotel behind them. Natchez had been in the antebellum era the wealthiest city per capita in the United States. The photograph records without comment what wealth and labor looked like a decade after that arrangement ended. In this portrait taken in Atlanta, Georgia in 1869, a man named James Tate sits with his wife and 3 children against a painted studio backdrop of columns and drapery. Tate, a carpenter, had purchased the freedom of 2 of his children before the war. By 1869, the family was whole for the first time. A sharecropper's cabin in the flatlands of Sunflower County, Mississippi. A woman stands in the doorway, one arm braced against the frame, watching the photographer with complete composure. The cotton field begins directly behind the house and extends to the tree line without interruption. The year this photograph was taken, Reconstruction was in its final months. Within a year, federal troops would be withdrawn from the South, and the legal architecture built to protect that woman's freedom would begin to be dismantled, piece by piece, in broad daylight.